Well, welcome to the Valentine Auditorium on the campus of the Institutes for the Achievement of Human Potential. You could not be more welcome to this party. You know, this room has seen thousands of parents from all over the world in the last 65 years. And, you know, a typical group attending one of our courses will be from a dozen countries, from 3 or 4 continents, from a dozen states of the United States. You know, when we decided to do this webinar, my concept was, let's have a nice intimate webinar with 20 or 30 parents, and we can answer questions. And then we put out the word that we were going to have it, and the response was just far greater than we anticipated. And that's a wonderful thing. I can't be upset about that. That's a wonderful thing. So we're delighted that there are a good number of you that we weren't expecting, and that's just wonderful. So welcome to what we hope is going to be a very significant presentation for you. You're giving us an hour of your time, and let's see if we can use every second. You know, many years back, we decided to create a course for our parents, an intensive course. And we wanted to take everything and put it in that course. And in the end, it proved too difficult, but we put a lot. It's a 40-hour intensive course. It's a magnificent course, but we couldn't put everything in that course. And with this webinar, the thought was, well, take what's in the 40-hour course and kind of condense it into an hour. That's impossible. So the things we're going to say with a very broad brushstroke. And if they pique your curiosity, there are many ways you can follow up and learn more. If I move rapidly, I am told through the miracle of technology, anyone attending this webinar will be able to watch it again. So that will be a good thing too. Well, let's get started. And I'm going to, as everybody does these days, I'm going to use PowerPoint. I warn you, I have a kind of love-hate relationship with PowerPoint. Let's see which side of that equation we're on right now. Well, you know, we've called this, is your child eligible for a life-changing developmental solution at home? And that is the question. The first question parents ask us when they call, when they email, when they contact us is my kid one of your kids? And of course, through the email, on the telephone, can't really answer that. We don't know your kid, but we hope by the time we're done this webinar, you'll have a much stronger certainty as to whether your kid is one of our kids, and maybe we could help you. Well, wanted to give you a little shot of the Valentine Auditorium. That's where we are right now on our beautiful campus. We're so lucky, the campus we have. I want to update the shot. This is a beautiful shot in the spring. You can see the azaleas are blooming. A little update of this shot. We're now under 13 inches of snow. It's absolutely gorgeous, a little nippy, but we're enjoying it. Well, let me tell you a little something about the Institutes for the Achievement of Human Potential. We've been here, we're a nonprofit institutes all on this campus. We've been here for 65 years. And we are chartered in the state of Pennsylvania with some key objectives. And let's take a look at those objectives. First, physical growth, ending in physical excellence. That's our goal for every kid. Next, intellectual growth, ending in intellectual excellence. Third, physiological growth, ending in physiological excellence. And finally, really the culmination of these three, if we do it right, social growth, ending in social excellence. Well, let's look a little bit first at our history, because it's a long history. You know, the institutes really began its journey with adults, not with children. When I was a youngster growing up here, and it's true, I've been the director for quite some time, but I didn't start out as the director. I started as a little kid growing up here, watching my father and Temple Fay create the first rehabilitation center in the state of Pennsylvania. And so I grew up when I was little with 60, 70, and 80-year-old stroke patients, patients with head injuries who lived right here on the campus and were treated here. That's really where our journey began, with those adults. Well, I wanted you to see the great Temple Fay, a genius in the world of medicine. He was right here at Temple University Hospital, famous for being an outstanding neurosurgeon, but he was fully qualified in 5 areas of medicine. Without the work of Temple Fay, our work wouldn't exist. Our field, our new field of child brain development, is utterly dependent on his early work. Now, in the world of medicine, he's actually better known for his work in hypothermia. It was Fay who did the very first work of chilling patients, packing them in ice, in fact, so that they could survive surgery and so they could recover. Without the work of Fay, modern surgery as we know it simply wouldn't exist. My father was at the University of Pennsylvania. He met Fay as part of his studies, and it was Fay who most greatly influenced his philosophy and thinking way when it came to treatment. My father, the founder of the institutes, he founded the institutes in 1955. And most of what we're going to look at right now is his philosophy, his program, his thinking way. Let's take a little trip around the world very briefly so that you have some idea why we've come to the conclusions we've come to. Because, you know, when we decided to move from treating adults, because the work with the adult stroke patients was so successful that my father then decided it was kind of tragic to be saving 70 and 80-year-olds while 3-year-olds were languishing in institutions, paralyzed, speechless, and with no treatment or no hope available to them. So when they began to shift their attention from adults to children, the world of brain injured children was very, very different than treating adults who had essentially been well until they had a stroke or until they had a car accident. It was a very different approach would have to be taken with very young children who had never moved, who were perhaps blind, perhaps deaf, perhaps insensate. And the very first thing they were struck by, you know, in science, if there is no measurement, there is no way to be scientific. Measurement is critical. And they realized there was no good way to measure the brain injured child. So they began to study the well child. And part of that study was to see well children, not just in Philadelphia, PA, but well children in many cultures, in many environments, under different circumstances. So we're going to take a quick trip around the world to see how that influenced our thinking. And here we are in the Xingu territory, Mato Grosso of Brazil Central. We were able to visit this culture back in the late 60s on 2 or 3 occasions. We went there for weeks at a time to evaluate and to study. We did that through the kind offices of Raimundo Veras and the Brazilian government, who flew us in. We were very lucky to be with these tribes because at that time, they had not been contacted from the outside except through the good offices of Claudio Villas-Boas. And it was through the Bureau of Indian Affairs we were able to do this. We were fascinated by these people, and you can see that there, believe it or not, that's me at age 19 in the Xingu territories with Dr. Rosalise Wilkinson, second medical director of the institutes. And part of my job was to do physical measurements on the tribes that we visited. But our primary interest was to look at these children growing up neurologically, to ask what are the influences of their environment? How much of a kid who's raised in Philadelphia, PA has to do with Philadelphia, PA, and how much has to do with the kid? How much of a Kalapalo Indian child's environment influences him and how much is just plain him? That was the key question in our travels and in our studies. Machu Picchu, we visited this site. And again, now this is a very hugely popular site, many people, but back in the 60s, it was not even easy to get there. We were very interested by this ancient culture, really just over the mountains from the Xingu. But Xingu tribes were pre-Stone Age. These people, highly sophisticated. We were interested in how did they raise their children? What was the early development period of children raised in this very sophisticated society? We went to Papua New Guinea, and again, you see mother with a baby on her back. In most of these cultures, children are protected. They stay on mother's body from birth to even 3 years, and sometimes longer, because it's a hostile environment. It's dangerous for a child. And here we see Gretchen Kerr, the second director of the institutes in Papua, visiting the Papuans. Again, you can see toddlers either on mother's body, aunt's body, dad's body, to keep them up off the ground, which is not safe. Here we are kind of half a world away, visiting the Inuit in Kotzebue, Alaska. That's my uncle, Robert Doman, the first medical director of the institutes. And he's doing a visual evaluation, looking at near point convergence, something that interested us greatly since we all live at near point, but most of the people we were visiting live pretty much at far point. The bush people of the Kalahari, certainly probably the greatest human beings who ever lived at survival. They live on a desert that's 120 degrees by day, that goes down to almost freezing at night. There is no water. Amazing people. And we wanted to see how they raise their children. And here we see bush baby. These babies too are held because the desert is very dangerous, too hot for the baby even. And here a young mother is putting her baby down to see, will he move? Can he move? Very interesting. The Maasai people, very proud, elegant, haughty people, great herdsmen, great hunters. And again, we're here looking at their kids. What are the advantages of such an environment to human development? And what, if any, are the disadvantages? Well, who are our kids? Who are our children? I think the best place to start to answer that question is with another question, which is how do kids who are struggling, kids who have problems, how do they get those problems? We believe strongly that our children begin life with a good brain, but somewhere along the line, that brain gets hurt. So let's look at the possibilities. Causes of problems. to the central nervous system. Rh factor incompatibility, German measles during pregnancy, prenatal oxygen deprivation, compression of the cord, prematurity, post-maturity, precipitous labor, baby born too quickly, prolonged labor, cesarean delivery, birth process delay, placenta previa, placenta abruptia, head injuries. You know, in the first 5 years of life, the most likely serious injury for a child is a head injury. Environmental toxins. This is a growing problem. This is a much bigger problem right now than it was even 10 years ago, and it's getting worse by the minute. Adverse reactions to drugs. This is a growing problem, in part because our children are growing up with environmental toxins, so we're just getting too many chemicals, but we have more drugs and we're delivering those drugs at younger and younger ages to central nervous systems that can't handle them. Adverse reactions to food can cause injury to the brain. Near drowning, and of course, disease. Any disease which causes inflammation can create devastating injury to the brain. Other causes of problems in the central nervous system could be problems that mother has. Drug abuse can cause problems, of course, for the baby in utero. Also, alcohol abuse can cause a big problem for the baby developing in utero. These would be problems with mother, and they would be relatively rare. Of course, a well child can get hurt if he undergoes surgery and there are complications from that surgery, especially complications that would decrease oxygen to the brain. We see the baby who may have had a stroke. This is relatively rare, but we do see it sometimes immediately after birth. The baby will have a stroke, sometimes in the first 5 years of life. Well, now let's look at our children. Our children range from birth to 20 years. And actually now we do have kids who get on the waiting list in utero, particularly if mother knows she's going to have a child with trisomy 21, she may get on the waiting list before the baby is born, and that's absolutely wonderful. Some of our kids may arrive absolutely paralyzed, perhaps speechless, unable to use their hands in any way, all the way to children who are almost perfect, but not quite. They may have a very mild reading problem or learning problem or a very mild speech problem. So we see the most hurt kids in the world with the biggest problems, all the way to children whose problems may be very minor to observe, but may be causing them very large problems in life. Some of our kids may be blind and deaf and insensate as well. Some of our children may have frequent debilitating seizures. This is a common symptom of injury to the brain. Many of our children are unable to talk or talk very poorly or have some significant speech problem. Some of our children may have all of these problems. Some of our children may have IQs that are between 0 and 90. Most of the children we see will be said to have unmeasurable IQs. Our children arrive here with symptomatic diagnoses. labels that describe a symptom like developmental delay or cerebral palsy, autism, mental retardation, attention deficit disorder, epilepsy, dyslexia, learning problems, Down syndrome. There are more than 350 different symptomatic labels currently used to describe brain-injured children. What's wrong with these labels? These labels have been used for decades. What's wrong with them? Each of these labels describes a symptom. A real diagnosis must describe the actual problem, not a symptom. Why does this matter? I mean, who cares? You know, imagine your child had a heart problem and you went to 10 different specialists and each of them gave you the same symptomatic label, or maybe each of them gave you a different symptomatic label, but none of those labels mentioned the heart. Do you think that would be a good thing or a bad thing? I think if you went to an 11th doctor and the 11th doctor said, your kid has a cardiac problem, I think you'd say, well, why wasn't the heart mentioned in the last 10 diagnoses? How are we going to solve the problem if we don't name where it originates? So this matters hugely because this is the swamp that our parents live in. Going from specialist to treatment to back to someone else, chasing their tails because they're chasing symptoms and they're not getting to the root and the heart of the matter. Symptomatic labels lead to treating the symptom. Treating the symptom never, ever works. I think we all know that. This is why so much of conventional therapy is ineffective with children who are hurt in the central nervous system. What's the real problem? All of these children have problems that originate in the central nervous system. All of these children are brain injured. You know, when you say this to parents, a lot of parents call us, say, oh, my kid's got cerebral palsy. We say, oh, he's brain injured. No, he's not brain injured. My kid's autistic. We say, oh, he's brain injured. No, he's not brain injured. Because everybody's afraid of the brain. And I think, actually, if you trace this back historically, in 1915, a famous doctor of that time said, once there is an insult to the central nervous system, it is not repairable, it is irreparable. You cannot fix a damaged brain. And, you know, that has been passed down and repeated so much that it has become, for 80 years, a part of the standard, not the standard of care, but the standard of no care. There's no point in providing treatment to a hopeless condition. So this kind of banned the term the brain from the environment when the brain is the heart of the matter. It's the heart of the matter. This is actually good news, not bad news. It's not bad news that the problem is in the brain. It's good news. Now, nobody thinks it's good to be brain injured, and especially none of us. We live in this world 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Nobody thinks it's great to be brain injured. But we do believe that it's much better to have a clean diagnosis of brain injury than a diagnosis of autism or cerebral palsy or developmental delay, because those are all incurable. Those are incurable. If you don't believe me, go up on the internet. First thing you'll get if you put it in. Trisomy 21, incurable. Cerebral palsy, incurable. Autism, incurable. These are incurable diseases with multi-billion-dollar industries now to support them. The good news is those are crazy, old-fashioned words that should have been retired 50 years ago. These are brain injured kids. And the good news is that the brain has tremendous plasticity. Neurophysiologists have known this for, well, at least since 1935, in the early work of Boris Nikolai Klosowski, proving that the brain has tremendous plasticity. Now everybody knows this. Now we have the term neuroplasticity. You can't read a newspaper or turn on the radio without hearing the word neuroplasticity, neuroplasticity, neuroplasticity. That's thrilling to us because we've been teaching that for 65 years. The brain responds to effective stimulation and opportunity, and it responds magnificently. What do we do? Well, I can pretty much put it in a nutshell. We do stimulation and opportunity. That's what we do. We provide stimulation, we provide opportunity. We provide opportunity, we provide stimulation. That's what we do. We stimulate the sensory pathways and we provide opportunity for the motor pathways. The sensory pathways, there are 5 of them. We can see, hear, feel, taste, and smell. We all know that. Those are the 5 pathways into the brain that we can stimulate. These pathways are one-way roads into the brain. It's important for us to know that. The motor pathways are one-way roads out of the brain. It's important for us to know that too, because a lot of the treatments that are ineffective with brain injured children are therapists trying to put information down those motor pathways, but the motor pathways are outgoing, not incoming, can only put in information through the sensory pathways. The normal functioning of the brain is completely dependent upon the integrity of these pathways. Our job, as we see it, is to determine which of these pathways is injured, where it's injured, and to reestablish the integrity of that pathway. How do we evaluate our kids? I've said earlier, without measurement, there is no science. So we had to say, what are the ways we could measure? We looked at what were the measurement tools for well kids, and we found, to our surprise, that there were no measurement tools. And so we set about to study the development of the well child so we could create a measurement tool, a way of knowing what are the critical stages of development of the well child and where in those stages is the hurt child coming up short. You know, there are probably, if you watched a well baby, you probably see him do 50 things in an hour. And we cataloged those things. But our question was not just what does a baby do to develop, but rather what are the critical things that he must do, and that if he fails to do them, his development will be disrupted or attenuated. So that was our quest. And we created the Institute's Developmental Profile. You know, we believe that if the Institute's is remembered 200 years from now, it will be remembered for this profile. Hopefully this profile will be in use for the next 500 years, because this profile actually measures the growth and development of the brain from birth essentially to its completion. Now, I can't really show you the profile very well in this environment, but I'm going to put a shot of it up there so you get a sense of it. Here's the profile, and it's too small for you to read the detail, but I want to, with a broad brush stroke, walk you through it a little bit. You can see that there are 7 stages, starting in the red at the bottom. That's the newborn. They are all the functions, the reflexive functions of the newborn baby that are critical. Then we work up to the 2.5-month-old, the 7-month-old, the 12-month-old, the 18-month-old, the 36-month-old, and finally the 72-month-old. So we're saying if we evaluate a well child on this profile, at 72 months, he will have essentially all the neurological equipment he needs to do well in life. Now, we all know a 6-year-old is a 6-year-old, but we're saying that a 6-year-old is essentially you and I just have a lot more experience, and I hope wisdom. But neurologically, he can pretty much do whatever you and I can do. So this is our measurement tool. Every child we see is measured on this profile. So we can see what areas are strong, what areas are weak and need more stimulation or more opportunity. This profile will yield a neurological age, the age of the brain, as opposed to the chronological age, the number of days that child has lived. When we compare that neurological age to the chronological age, we get a percent. If it's 100%, we're looking at a well kid. If it's 50%, we're looking at a kid with a very significant problem. And of course, every time we see our children, we measure them against this profile to see how we're doing. Are we winning or are we losing? So this profile, we think, is incredibly important. It's the oldest measurement tool of its type in the world of brain injured people. The only other measurement tools out there are, frankly, they're really more governed by insurance companies than scientists interested in the brain. They measure how long it takes the patient to pull up his pants. I would say they're looking for how much of a pain in the neck is the patient and how much are we going to pay to take care of him, rather than what's going on in the brain and how can we fix that brain. Now, I want to take one, I'm going to go back. I want to take one box of the profile, just that the box right at the bottom of the visual column, just to show you, just to blow up one and show you one, so you have a little sense of the profile. So we're going to look at the most basic visual ability of the newborn, and it is the light reflex. And when our parents come here, we teach them every box of this profile, how to evaluate it and how to program that, how to provide the stimulation needed to make that stronger. So with the light reflex, we're simply teaching them how to evaluate that. We're showing them, well, here's the light, here's the eye in the dark. We know the pupil dilates in the dark, but when we flood in light, we get constriction. and that's the light reflex. So this is the beginning of evaluating that visual pathway to know, does my child have a good light reflex? Is it consistent? Is it complete? And if it is not, how to stimulate effectively to improve that light reflex. All that we do is provide the brain with visual, auditory, and tactile stimulation with increased frequency, intensity, and duration in recognition of the orderly way in which the brain grows. That's what we do at these institutes. How do we do it? The 5 most important words in the world of brain injury. Every parent of a hurt kid, and really every parent of a well kid, needs to know these 5 words. The brain grows by use. The brain grows by use. The brain literally grows, just like the biceps, by use. Every parent in the world knew and understood that. The world would begin to change rapidly. To increase central nervous system transmission, you must provide stimulation with increased frequency, intensity, and duration. There it is. That's the heart of the matter. Now, sometimes a parent of a blind kid will say to us, well, gee, I turned the lights on and the lights off. My kid had some stimulation. Why didn't that pathway grow? And the answer will reside in frequency, intensity, and duration. The question is, did you do it often enough? The question is, did you have a strong enough light? And did you do it for long enough? That's the heart of the matter when it comes to changing the brain. You know, let's look at results. And again, I apologize. I'm not going to be able to dig deep into these to talk about them as much as I'd like in the time that we have. But these results are up on our website, and I would very much encourage you to go up and take a look at them there. But let's just look at the results achieved in 3,349 kids between 1998 and 2020. First of all, let's look at seeing. Blind kids. Of the 418 children who were blind, 350, 84% saw for the first time. Wow. 302 of those children learned to read. And that's not Braille, that's reading, the way you and I read. That's pretty high standard for a blind kid to be able to read. Hearing. Of the 177 children who were deaf, 148 children, 83%, heard for the first time. Now, these two statistics, blindness, deafness, are always shocking to people because most people think that blindness is in the eye and deafness is in the ear. By the way, there's certainly blindness that's in the eye. If your eye is badly injured, it won't work and we won't be able to fix that. But much of the blindness you see in a brain injured child and deafness is not in the eye, it's not in the pathway, it's in the brain. And therefore, if we stimulate the visual pathway, information will arrive in the brain and you will fix that problem. It's a very exciting prospect. Understanding. Of the 1,556 children whose understanding was not yet equal to that of the average 3-year-old, 1,366 children, 87%, achieved this level of understanding for the first time. Crawling. Of the 1,313 children who were unable to move, 528, 40%, crawled for the very first time. In short, they went from being paralyzed to being able to crawl across a room. An amazing accomplishment. Creeping. Of the 640 children who were unable to creep, 417, 65%, began to creep for the first time. This is to say they defied gravity to move to the third dimension and creep all over the house on hands and knees. Again, for a child who started life paralyzed, pretty amazing. Walking. Of the 668 children who were unable to walk, 361, 54%, began to walk without help for the first time. And most of those children, the vast majority, their parents were told, these children will never walk. Get them a wheelchair. They're going to live their life in a wheelchair. Running. Of the 807 children who could walk but not run, 408, 50% learned to run for the very first time. Speaking. Of the 1,608 children who were unable to speak, 683, 42%, spoke for the first time. Reading. Of the 1,969 children who were unable to read, 1,900 children, 96%, read for the first time. In this statistic, you get an insight into the best kept secret in the world. Brain injured kids are smart. They're very, very smart. Writing. Of the 879 children who were unable to write, 217, 24% wrote for the first time. Now, whenever I put this up, the staff give me a bad time because our standard here is they have to write with their hand. If we included in this statistic the number of kids who can use a typewriter or a board or any selection of letters, then this would go way up. It would triple probably, because many, many of our kids communicate in this way. This is an interesting one. Health. Of the 1,945 children who were on the program for at least 12 months, 548, 28%, achieved perfect health for at least 12 consecutive months. Now, you know, in the United States, the average well child is sick 8 to 10 times a year. Did you know that? It's kind of shocking. So the well kid may get sick 8 to 10 times in a given year. Here are brain injured kids who often arrive here chronically ill, which is to say they've more days of illness than wellness. But after 12 months of program at least, 28% of them had zero illness for 12 months. In short, they're the healthiest member of the family. Of these, 206 children had no illness for more than 24 months, and one has had no illness for 12 years. I think he's just crossed illness off his list. Detoxification. Of the 826 children who were on anticonvulsant medication, 520, 63% were completely and successfully detoxified. Of the remaining 306 children, 20 are in the process of completing detoxification. This is an important statistic. Many children, 2, 3, or 4 years of age, arrive here on not 1, not 2, sometimes 3 anticonvulsant medications. It is our experience that many of these medications are suppressive to the central nervous system. It is not reasonable to be stimulating with one hand and sedating with the other. I don't think it will surprise you when I say that at the institutes, we think parents are the most important element in our program. And that's because parents are the solution. Parents are not the problem, parents are the answer. You know, time is the enemy of the hurt child. In many other conditions, illnesses, and problems that beset human beings, time is a friend. Every day you survive, you get better. But when a child has a problem in the central nervous system and it isn't being solved, time is the enemy. Because if your child needs help, he needs that help right now. Every day that your child is not better, his brother, his sister, his neighbor, his cousin, they all move on. But they move on without him. He falls further and further behind. You know, you have given us an hour of your time, your precious time. Now, we propose to give you our time. And we propose to do that so that you can find out what is the next step. What is the way to get your child getting better every day? You know very well, your child did not come out of a cookie cutter. He's unique. And to some degree, his problems are unique. Right now, schedule a free consultation. The minute this webinar ends, there'll be a link. Go to that link and schedule your consultation. Don't postpone it, not for an hour from now, not for tomorrow, not for the next day. Make that appointment, make that time, so we can talk to you and find out, what do you need? What do you want? How can we get your child getting better every day? Okay?